Welcome to the Ferment podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today we have another episode in our conversation series with Adam and Heather Russell.
What up, everybody? It's the Ferment podcast, and today it's another in our conversation series. I say conversation because Heather's with me.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody. We're here. We're in my office.
Yes, we are.
Podcasting. That's all you got?
Oh, no. Here we go.
Oh, yeah. Well, hey, this is what we were thinking we'd like to do. It's been a year. We're coming to the end of March here, almost April, and it's been a year since we've had COVID land with us, and we've all reimagined church, and we somehow made it through last year. Hopefully you didn't lose your mind, and we're still pastors, we're still worship leaders, we're still team members and tech people. I mean, we're still here. High five.
Trying our best.
Yeah, high fives, everybody. No, but Heather and I were talking I guess it was yesterday. I guess we heard the same NPR report where the CDC people said, basically,
Oh, if you've been vaccinated, you can be indoors. I mean, they said small groups safely indoors together, which is just...
And they said safely indoors together without masks.
Oh, without masks. That's the kicker.
Yeah, and I just thought, wow.
Here we are.
If the CDC is saying this, that would be the most conservative voice probably on these issues that we're going to hear. So if the CDC is saying this and if NPR is saying this, then my goodness, we're turning some kind of corner, right?
Yeah, something's changing.
Yeah, so I guess you and I were just talking yesterday how it feels like it's getting better.
Right. It feels like it's inching more towards normal. And not just the new weird normal, but like normal.
Yeah, normal. We were even chatting a little bit about how even before I heard that story, I think for a few weeks, maybe like a month, it just feels like there's new energy.
Right. We've seen numbers increase around here, and I don't know, it just feels like there's a little bit of spring in the air.
I think so.
In all areas.
I think so too. So we were just chatting a bit about how it feels like things are getting better. I know when you said numbers around here, what you mean is church.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so we've been meeting in person since July. Face masks required, social distance, you have to sign up, limited kids, the whole thing, and at the beginning, it kind of sucked.
It felt depressing at first.
It was very depressing. I mean, we were just...
Well, we were so close to what it used to be,
That's right.
Now we're far enough out.
And in the last, I would say 6 weeks, we've been hitting the limits on numbers of people who can come to church. And
on our signups,
yeah. And kids' church has been as full as we feel like we can make it and be responsible. And I don't know, it just feels like the service, it's reminiscent of what church used to be a little bit.
Right.
Even though it's still only maybe 30% of what we used to be.
Right, because there for a long time, we'd land the service and everybody quickly headed to their cars. And now people are lingering.
That's right. I mean, it's that old thing of how do you know if the Holy Spirit has been to your church at all?
People won't leave.
People won't leave. That's always been a sure sign for me. It's like, oh, God has been moving or God has been with us because people just want to stay.
They're drawn to each other and they want to talk. And
yeah. So we've been noticing that.
Yeah.
We've been noticing that. And so it just feels like, gosh, we're having some kind of new energy. It feels like things are getting better. And so before we jump into maybe the next thing I want to talk about, I guess I would just say to the podcast listeners, is that your experience?
Yeah.
I'm interested. I know you're listening to us, but man, let us know. Drop a comment on the Instagram post for this episode and just let us know, like, number one, are things getting better where you're at? Do you feel better?
Yeah.
I'd be interested. I guess I do want to spend a moment here before we move deeper into what we were talking about. And I just want to ask you, we've done leadership, we've done ministry for a year now. You have any thoughts about that?
Thoughts about doing leadership and ministry?
I'm just saying, like, okay, I'm just saying, like, here, take a moment to reflect. Anything that feels high or low or just feels like you need to say or want to say after doing this. You've been a mom, you've been a student, you shut down your business, you helped us lead the church through all these changes? I don't know. Anything you want to say?
I guess it boils down to, I think it is more clear than ever that humans can experience really good things and really terrible things all at the same time.
Well, that's just life, isn't it?
It is life. But I think maybe before this year, I felt like it was a little more defined. Like you had good seasons and bad seasons, but this has really been a terrible season and a wonderful season.
All at the same time.
All at the same time.
Yeah, it's been a moment of paradox, if we could use that word.
Right. On a personal note,
Mhm.
I lost my business, which was sad and
Tell everybody
terrible.
what the business is.
Okay. So I had a children's art studio where I taught art lessons for kids from ages 2 all the way up to high schoolers, sometimes adults. I loved it. It was like this little creative hub in the middle of our town, and I could make it what I wanted. And we made such awesome projects with these little kiddos. And it was great. And it was my little baby.
Yeah.
And it's been going on, I think, 6 years now.
Yeah.
And COVID showed up, and you just really can't get 15 2- and 3-year-olds together to finger paint out of the same bucket safely.
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing about this, just to maybe fill people in a bit more who are listening. Because your space was so small,
It was tiny.
it was tiny, which is part of the brilliance.
I don't know, 400 square feet?
Maybe not even.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it was maybe 400 or 500 square feet.
Yeah,
But it was small. It was one room.
Yeah.
Really cool. And so many things happened in there. But even when the governor said, oh, you can do your business, but it has to be social distance, it's like, well,
With the way the room was set up, I could have 2, maybe 3 children at a time.
and that
And
doesn't pay the rent.
Yeah, it's just not sustainable.
Yeah. So maybe one of the first things that you're reflecting on is, A, joy and sadness together, but maybe one of the sadnesses is,
A loss of
a
a
real loss.
dream. Yeah.
yeah,
So something I built and I lost. But it opened up this door to where I was able to go back to school.
Yeah.
And so I'm in college.
you're in college.
And
You're the, I'm using air quotes, non-traditional student.
you guys, I had to take New Testament,
Woo.
my first little term back.
This is a great
in the
story.
fall. I was like, okay, this will be great. I should do okay in here.
Yeah.
And so
I go to church.
my professor, we were doing this getting to know you thing. Of course, all this is online. And he told me, oh, I just think it's so sweet when older women go back to school later in life.
Solid burn.
Oh my gosh.
Solid burn.
I know.
Oh, by the way, how old was your professor?
I don't know, 24.
Yeah. So he's as young as he could have possibly been.
Yeah.
Right?
So he was sweet. It was fun. But I was like, oh
yeah.
I am really a non-traditional.
We're the old people now.
We are. So it opened up that door, and it's going good. And so I'm working towards getting my teaching degree.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great story. Sort of encapsulates the whole year.
Mm-hmm. And I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of people have experienced that in their own way this
Yeah.
year.
Well, okay, let me shift this again, because this is really what I wanted to talk about.
Mhm.
Not just reflecting over the past year, but while we're reflecting over the last year, I guess what I've been thinking is it feels like things really are changing,
Mhm.
that there's new momentum, things are getting better, like visibly better, like CDC saying, hey, enough of you have been vaccinated and we feel confident, blah, 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 blah. And, at least anecdotally here, and then with some of the other pastors we've been talking to, there's just more energy for church. People are coming back to church. They want to come back to church. I guess I've been thinking that this is a moment where we need to do some introspection and do some thinking, like right now over the next few weeks, maybe a month, and think about, well, what did we learn last year?
Well, right, because we could just barrel forward and
Yeah.
jump back in and put everything right back in the same way it was before.
That's right.
And it worked before, it'll probably work again.
Yeah.
We could do that.
Yeah.
And it would probably be okay.
Well, I guess exactly.
But we
Well,
don't have to.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted to get to. So I'm just wondering if we're not in this, let me use a word we don't normally use. We're in some liminal space,
Mm-hmm.
like in between dusk and dawn. It's neither what it's going to be, but it's not what it was.
Right.
It's like this transitional in between moment. And those are tough places to be sometimes, but there's a gift. And the gift is, okay, we have a moment to rethink. And I guess I just want to talk about church for a minute. I mean, you could apply this to your family or your vocation the way you have, going back to school. But I just want to apply it to church and think, wow, we redid church completely.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us went, to online only or then socially distant. You have to wear a mask. And so now we have like hybrid models going. And so, but now we're heading, you can feel the momentum pushing us back to normal, air quotes again. And so this is a moment where I think we have to be real careful
Mm-hmm.
that we don't let the momentum that's around us steal from us the opportunity to rethink and go, well, is there anything about the way I used to do church that I don't want to do that again?
Because, Adam, like when you are getting ready to wake up in the morning
Yeah.
and you're not quite asleep and you're not quite awake, there's that magical time where you have the most vivid dreams.
Yeah.
And you can make yourself wake up and get ready for your day.
Yeah.
But that is my favorite time to just lay in the bed and kind of live in that dream space.
Yeah, the in-between.
And so we can do that right now.
We can. So I guess the thing I want to talk about is there anything I just don't want to do anymore?
Yeah.
Or is there anything I want to change?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything I don't want to pick up? I think that's the question I've been sort of thinking
Mm-hmm.
as it relates to church. And I guess I'm thinking about that in the broadest terms possible.
Yeah.
Or conversely, are there things I really want to get back to? Things that I was forced to give up this year. But man, I miss it and it feels important.
Mm-hmm. Or things that you've tried and you want to keep around.
That's right. So I guess I'm just pointing out for us,
Mm-hmm.
since we do the church thing, but then also to the listeners, wow, this feels like a moment to reimagine.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? There's been some things that we reimagined, readapted for our moments of crisis
Mm-hmm.
throughout this year that we thought were just for that moment, but I think they might be for the long haul.
Yeah, I would imagine that lots of people and lots of churches who never, ever live streamed their service.
That's what I was thinking of too.
They never did it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was us.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people in our town did live stream their service.
Of course. I mean, it's not even the new thing.
But we never have.
No, we never did. It's funny. We're early adopters on some things. But then when it comes to technology and that kind of thing, sometimes I drag my feet just a little bit.
Yeah.
And so we never live streamed, but I can imagine that we'll probably keep the live stream going forward.
Yeah, it's been a real gift to a lot of people, especially we're in such a transient community where like college students come and go and they're all over the place. And so many of them would get really connected for the 4 years that they're in this town and then go on. And this has been wonderful for them to kind of like reconnect.
Yeah. Even if it's just one Sunday every 12 weeks
great.
Or something, it's kind of a gift. So I can imagine that some people would think, wow, maybe I'll keep the live stream going.
Sure.
But then maybe there's other things that we did before I just want to let go of.
Yeah. Like hugging.
Yeah. I'm fine with that. Whatever. Whatevs.
Yeah.
I'm not a hugger.
Yeah.
I've gotten more huggy. I'm getting better.
Yeah.
I'm the original social distancer.
You kind of like the thing where people ask if you're hugging now, because then you have an option.
Yeah, that's right. And it's like, well, how about an elbow?
There you go.
I dig that. Yeah, so this is maybe a moment to reimagine. And so I guess let's just do that for a minute.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about some of the things that we're reimagining. I'll just go first here. I'll admit I've been thinking that this is a moment or a gift to rethink the church liturgy.
Mm-hmm.
Our church is 23 years old, and we just have a way of doing things. And we've altered it a few times.
A few, but it really hasn't changed drastically.
No, I mean, we kind of have the standard vineyard church approach of, there's a welcome, there's some songs up front,
Mm-hmm.
and we were always like 25 to 30 minutes. We were a little longer on the worship side, and then there was a message on the back, usually like 40 minutes, and then there's a ministry time, and that's what we did, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as I've experienced more church in the last decade, and by more I just mean lots of different kinds of churches, I've gotten to travel a little bit, and as I've made friends outside of the vineyard, I've just seen a lot of things that are beautiful that are not really a part of our vineyard tradition, and that I've always been kind of secretly jealous of, by the way, you might be thinking, well, what? I just mean like more scripture as a part of worship, more call and response. And that was actually something we had inserted before the pandemic. We were pretty good about like having some litanies.
We were.
Some spoken word worship where there was a leader and then the congregation responds. But then also, just for us, I've just been thinking, I want more communion.
Yeah.
I know lots of Vineyard churches are every week. We never were. We were like once a month. And I've been thinking, gosh, I want more communion. I've also been thinking, I want less preaching.
Well, yes. It's been funny because, traditionally, trying to shorten a service or cut time off or shorten this part or that part felt like such a negative thing. It felt like you were like shutting something down or limiting or whatever.
Right.
And now it feels like a service or hospitality to people because, they're in their homes or I don't know. It just feels it has a different aspect to it.
I will totally admit there's something about the streaming thing, especially when we were only streaming. So those months, March through June, we came back in July. Those months when we were only streaming, I was just very aware that everyone had Zoom fatigue. And then also, how much do you really want to watch church on your computer or TV? Like how much?
Right. Probably a little, but
Yeah.
We had our services would go not crazy long, but longer than I would want to sit in front of my computer.
Right. Especially if you're trying to think of having little kids in the room and stuff. And so we just made a real hard push to have our services at, way under an hour.
So something that would have felt negative and like we were limiting now felt like hospitality.
Yeah. And as a result, I see the continued hospitality of it, or the invitation that it could also be a way to welcome people. And I know like lots of people who are listening to this are like, yeah, man, we've been doing that for years. We've always been 1 hour church people or something.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of us haven't been. And so I've just been thinking about the church liturgy, both its length, but then also like what other elements could be a part of worship.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. I think sometimes in the Vineyard too, and this is not a knock, I just think it's such a part of our story, worship, and by worship, I mean sung worship and preaching, and then ministry time, that very ABC thing, which clearly changed my life. I just think we think that, well, that's what church is, and worship is what you sing. And in the last few years, I've just been very touched by some non-instrumental or even non-singing forms of worship, just public scripture reading without any commentary, and some different kinds of prayers.
Yeah.
And
those moments have been really rich.
They have. And I've just thought, this is a moment where we can and should reimagine the liturgy. And I want to carefully consider what we bring back.
Well, like practically speaking, we've gone from doing 3 to 4 songs sets to 2 and then 1 at the end. Like that's a big change.
That's a big change. And I don't know that I want to keep that. I mean, I think that was like a pandemic move. And I've been missing the singing, and you can tell the church has missed the singing.
Yeah, they have.
Like, they sang our ears out last Sundays.
Like we have masks on and it's still loud.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. But I do think there's some ways to reimagine. I will say this, the song at the end, it hasn't really been ministry time song. It's been more of a benediction. Like, hey, we sing and we're in, and it feels very sweet. There's something about that, like, hey, we're going to sing this song at the end of the sermon, and it's like, wow.
Yeah, it lands it nicely.
It does. So I don't know. I haven't even made any hard decisions, and clearly I'd want to talk to the team, but feels like this is a moment where everybody gets to rethink, and I don't want to just get swept up into the way we used to do it, or even swept up into what we are doing now, and just kind of like going, well, that's what we do now, without any thinking.
Right. We're in that in-between where you can feel around a bit.
Yeah. Holy disruption.
I love it.
This is a moment to rethink. Yeah. What else? What are you thinking?
Well, I'm currently the children's pastor here, so I'll talk about the kids ministry for a minute.
Yeah, that's fine.
So during this last year, we have really, limited our numbers and limited the ages that we bring back in the kids wing. And I have it's been me and a team of about 3, maybe 4 other people. So it's been a very small team. It's been very, focused. And we had to keep it safe and all that stuff back in the kids wing.
Yep.
So it looked totally different.
Yep.
And now that we're starting to add more kids in, I have to look at my team.
Yeah.
And what I realized is I need to rebuild this team.
Well, actually, what we were talking, not to take it off of this moment, but what we've been talking about at staff meeting for a little while is we have to rebuild all the teams.
Right. Because
this is part of the reality now.
Well, in kids ministry, along with all the other service teams, but kids ministry they're all volunteers.
Yeah.
And so you take a year off and things change.
They do.
And we're going to talk about this a little later, but there's some of my team that probably won't come back.
Yeah.
And there's some of the team who has really risen and been showed up and taken new leadership roles.
Yeah.
And so it's just time to reevaluate, okay, who belongs where and who's really showing up in this area or has shown just a real passion for this or that. So rebuilding my team and reimagining what my team is going to look like is probably my number one thing right now.
Yeah, well, I guess I just want to dive in here just a little bit and talk about rebuilding teams because I think that's another thing. And it's less in that conversation of what do I want to pick up and what do I want to let go of?
Mm-hmm.
So it's maybe adjacent to that, but I think it's a similar conversation in that, gosh, we're all going to be rebuilding teams right now.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to rebuilding teams and when it comes to working with volunteers at church, it's less about what do you get to let go or what do you want to let go of and what do you want to pick up, but it's more about, well, who's here?
Right.
Who's God giving me?
Right.
Right. And one of the things that you and I've been noticing is that the people who used to be here and the people who are here right now, there's some overlap, but man, there's just some new stuff in the house.
Right. And to be able to acknowledge that and be like, oh, well, this person was always served in this one way, but maybe that's not going to be true moving forward. And I think part of moving forward this next season is actually putting on your reality goggles and not just thinking nostalgically about who has traditionally done this or that, but really looking at, oh man, who's showing up and who's God giving me?
Who's God giving me and who feels comfortable coming to church right now and the whole thing.
Well, and I want to say one more thing about what we're going to let go and pick up before we move on to teams. But I noticed that during the past year, the thing that mattered and that I missed and that, I don't know, was relevant was my connection to the actual kids. Getting to know the kids, getting to know the families, knowing what's going on in their lives. I never once worried about if, I wonder if they're missing all the fun games we played. Fun games are fun, but I think I'm going into this next season really focused on actually connecting with the kids in a getting to know them way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does because before, at least in our kids' wing, it was slam packed with kids. And so you're on the hamster wheel and you're preparing.
Well, I think
things.
I went in with kid management in my brain.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I'm moving into kid pastoring.
Yeah.
Does that make,
Yeah.
So it's gone from more of this is a job I do and I organize things to keep the kids busy so their parents can encounter the Lord. That's kind of what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm oh, no, my job actually is to pastor these kids, get to know them, talk to them about what their questions are and what they're feeling and teach them about Jesus and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Way more than just
management. Yeah.
That's just my personal.
Well, yeah. And it's interesting that you're able to connect with that or see it and feel it when we've had a year where just the sheer numbers of kids you're dealing with comes way down. And so some of that external pressure that happens when there's just more.
It's almost like it's so much noise you can't hear it.
Yeah, it's so much noise you don't even see what's happening. But then when you get that out, you can go, oh, I see what this really is. And I have a feeling by June or July, it's all going to be back, or some
Right.
version
And
of
it's not like the games and the programs don't matter. I'm still going to do all of it,
Of
just
course.
maybe with a different focus.
Yeah, so it feels like that's a way in which the last year was a gift.
It was,
That was a
because I
gift.
was able to see that my role maybe is a little more than I was giving it credit for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we can take that with us
Mm-hmm.
going forward and build that into our teams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to building teams and just even, kind of what you said a moment ago, where you're talking about like living in reality land, like who's actually here?
Right.
One of the things that you and I've heard from several pastor friends is, as momentum picks up and as our churches do begin to take some shapes of normalcy again,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, who's with us?
And it doesn't even mean who has showed up to in-person church,
Yeah.
because a lot of people have small kids or health problems and they couldn't come.
Yeah.
But it's more about who's connected.
Yeah, who's connected. But it's interesting how fairly universally it feels like we've come through some sort of a sifting,
Mm-hmm.
and like new people have emerged, and people who were key, maybe we see them, maybe there's still here, but then also there's some key people who maybe aren't.
Right.
And so it's like, wow, what does that mean? I think that's a question a lot of pastors are asking. What does it mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially if key leaders, elders, core team members have just been less present. I don't know what that means. We're talking about building teams and that being a part of this next season. But then there's also just this sifting that's been happening. And I think a lot of us have been asking, well, what does it mean?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that part of this, we won't even fully know who we have to build teams with for a little while.
Yeah.
So I kind of think it might be important for us in church leadership to go ahead and prepare ourselves mentally that people we assume will jump back into their roles might not.
Uh-huh.
But then also to keep our eyes open for who might be ready to take those places that maybe we hadn't thought of before.
That's right. I mean, one of the things that I had written down earlier was newness over loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because kind of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. This has been a year where there's been a lot of difficulty,
Mm-hmm.
but then been a lot of gifts. So it's good and bad, the paradox. And I think we're heading in this middle space again, this liminal space where it's going to be more paradox. Like we're trying to build, and at the same time we're realizing, oh, there's new people here, so that's very exciting.
Yeah.
And maybe even people that God is raising up and who have energy and vision and that kind of thing. And then, but at the same time, there's loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we actually have to deal with both of those, don't we?
Right, we do. We have to acknowledge it, first of all.
Yeah.
And talk about it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I could see a scenario where pastors and leaders jump back in and they're very excited about the new people, new programs, getting back together, this and that. And they never let themselves really acknowledge or feel what it means to them that some people that maybe they've done ministry with for years might have parted ways over one of the very many issues that have creeped up this year.
Yeah. I mean, it's insane.
Crept up.
Yeah.
Crept up.
It's insane. I mean, I think this is going to be a big thing. And I think this is another thing we need to maybe write down on a piece of paper somewhere. This next 4 to 5 months of sort of extended in-between space as we're rebuilding, energy's coming back. But then also we're just seeing the reality. Okay, our church is filling up, and maybe it's filling up with some new people, and maybe some people we thought would already be back haven't come back. What does that mean? So newness and loss, actually naming it and dealing with it.
Mm-hmm. And holding them together.
Yeah. So let me add one more idea into this.
Yes.
So we got newness and loss.
Yes.
Holding them together, naming it, acknowledging it, seeing it. Talk about it with your staff.
Talk about it with your staff.
Bring it out. Like let's get there. And we're rebuilding teams.
Mm-hmm.
But then before that, in this conversation, I was saying that this is a space to reimagine.
Mm-hmm.
That this is a space to go, well, maybe there's just some stuff in the past I don't want to bring back into the rat race again.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's some things that I want to interject. So it's a moment of change. When I put all that together, newness, loss, letting go, picking up, changing, changing liturgy, building new teams, reimagining what it means to do church in a post-pandemic 21st century sort of context. That can be very exciting, but it can also be paradoxical again, right?
Yeah, weighty.
Yeah, it's weighty. I'd love it if you would just share with us a little bit from that podcast episode that you listened to. I think it was even this week, right?
I really think I should be president of the Steve Cuss fan club.
Shout out Steve Cuss.
Goodness.
Shout out managing leadership anxiety.
I know. If you aren't aware, Steve Cuss, who we've had on the Ferment before,
Yeah, rock star.
is great. But he has a podcast called Managing Leadership Anxiety.
He also has a book by the same
Right.
title.
It's awesome. I
Yes.
feel like every time we do a podcast together, we reference it.
Well, it's
Can
just
you
been
tell it's helped us?
It's just been very, very, very helpful.
Yeah.
It's been helpful to us as leaders, but it's also been very helpful to our staff.
It has.
Okay, so you were talking about his podcast, and I thought this was
Yeah, so I sent this one
great.
to Adam yesterday because this was his most recent podcast as of today.
Yeah, he had a guest on. I think the guest's name is Jack Chitama. That's it.
All right. I'm not great with like remembering details. It's more like paraphrasing and overviews. So
Yes.
at one point, they were discussing change and growth.
Yes, they were talking about, hey, we want growth,
Well,
but growth by definition is change.
and with change, or with growth comes change, and with change comes loss of some sort,
Yes,
and with loss comes grief,
yes,
and with grief comes anxiety. So
Yes.
it's just a given. So basically, if you're going to grow,
yes.
if you're going to change, there is going to be anxiety built into the system.
That's
Like
correct.
it's just going to be there.
Yeah,
So the fact that anxiety levels rise in the atmosphere around you
Yeah.
is not necessarily a sign that you're doing something wrong.
yeah,
I think it's just part of growth.
yes,
It's part of it.
yes.
Now, how we carry that,
Yeah.
how we process that, what we do with it, that's a different story.
Yeah. So I think that little, I don't even know what you call it, that sequence that you gave there.
It feels like it should be in a science book with those little arrows between each thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. It's almost like when the tadpole becomes a frog,
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's just a little
Growth,
tadpole,
change.
and then it grows the little legs at the back, and then it grows the front one, then the head
Mhm.
changes its shape, then it drops the tail, and then it comes out of the water.
So, Steve, if you want to put that in your book.
Hey, Steve. Hey, Steve. No, so I want to say that sequence again
Sure.
for the tens of people who are taking notes right now. If there's growth, there will be change. When there's change, there will be loss. When there's loss, there will be grief. And when there's grief, there will be anxiety. So when we're imagining, well, what do we want to let go of in church?
Mm-hmm.
And what do we want to pick up?
Mm-hmm.
And how might we want to shape our services or our teams, rebuilding teams, or our leadership structure?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you had an elder who's been with you for 15 years, but like
They just
ghosted,
couldn't hang with X, Y, or Z. Yeah.
couldn't hang with
Whatever.
the political season, or just couldn't hang, or just maybe brunch was better. I don't know.
I get it.
So there'll be loss, right?
Yeah.
So if we're doing all this stuff that we've been sort of talking about here in this episode, then there'll be an anxiety in the system. And so
Mm-hmm.
what are we going to do?
Well, what we have learned,
Yeah.
Adam,
Yeah.
over the
Tell me.
past year is that building our inner emotional health
Yes.
personally
Yes.
is the best way to manage anxiety in a system.
Correct.
Like, we got to figure out how to get ourselves healthy
That's right.
moving forward.
Well,
Like,
this
that's number one.
Well, this is one of the things that I love that Steve talks about. And Steve's sort of coming from that family systems approach.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that family systems says is we're all in a system. We're all in systems all the time. And the system is working whether we see it or don't, right?
Mhm.
And when anxiety in the system rises, and by the way, it's always there. And so if we're talking about change, we're basically just pressing the
Kicking it up,
accelerator
yeah.
on some anxiety. Like the number one thing we can do as leaders to manage the anxiety in the system is for us as individual leaders to become more healthy.
Right. Which might not seem like the most proactive thing. you might immediately think, oh, I need to implement, this checklist. I need us to all get together and talk through this and that. And that might need to happen.
Yes,
but
of course.
before any of that happens, you got to check yourself.
You got to check yourself.
Yeah.
So I've just been thinking too, just about this. I've been thinking about that little sequence: growth, change, loss, grief, anxiety. I've been thinking about well, what do we do? And especially since family systems is kind of well, you need to become a healthier individual. I the thing that you and I can do is for us to become healthy. And I think when it comes to what am I going to do in a real healthy way, I think the first thing we have to do is just sort of own that this is a reality, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And can we begin to name it, and especially name those things that might be anxious or painful for ourselves? Because I know, pastors, we hate losing.
Yeah.
We hate loss.
Well, and I think it might be a personal thing, but it also might be, man, you're doing this for people, and you know that there's abundant life available.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about you losing. It's no, there's more for you here. I don't know. It can feel like a lot more than just a lost seat in the sanctuary.
That's right. And so I think it just feels pertinent to me that maybe, for my own health, it would be good to name the losses and to process those.
Yeah. So that might look like in a staff meeting saying, you know what, so-and-so, they're not going to be around, and that stinks. And maybe we should pray for them, and maybe we should wish them well on their journey.
Oh, I think that's totally for sure, right? That would be an emotionally mature thing to do, right?
It would be way easier to be like, that idiot couldn't stick it out with us and bailed and this and that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of what I'm feeling is, maybe we have to name some of the losses, and then there should be some moment, especially if we're working backward, or not backward, but if we're working forward here, loss has grief, even at a staff meeting or in a personal way, allowing ourselves to be sad about the loss.
Right.
Even if we're sure that the change needs to happen. It's a good change. I'm excited about that change. But it's okay if there's something that's losing or sad, and hold some space there.
And I mean, I'm just thinking about this. The reason we're harping on loss.
Yeah.
It's not because we've lost our whole church or anyone we know has lost their whole church. It's more all of us have lost something this year.
Yeah.
And if you haven't had a relationship that's been impacted by the political atmosphere, I'd be surprised.
Oh, are you kidding me? You're in full-blown denial.
So if you are leading a church, there has been an impact over this past year.
I promise you.
So you may not know about it.
Yeah.
You might not even know about it yet.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. If we don't attend to our souls in this way, then what I'm seeing in the little sequence, if I don't deal with the loss, if I don't name it, if I don't hold some space for it, maybe if I don't have a spiritual director who helps me process it, a place where I can talk about it in a non-judgmental atmosphere. If I don't do that, then what I see in this sequence is I'm going to carry around anxiety and grief with me, even if I'm not aware of it. And I'm bringing it into the system that's already maybe more anxious because things are changing.
Yeah. And the thing is, since we're being invited into that space of kind of reimagining, it'd be way easier to go into that space and reimagine without the barrier of anxiety helping us make our decisions.
Yeah. That's a good word. That's a real good word.
Thanks.
That's great. That was downright pastoral.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Anything else that you want to say about giving our space to think through that sequence and how we might manage that? Because we've talked about hey, okay, this is a time to do some personal work. If you haven't already, do the personal work. Maybe this is a time to do some teamwork. I even just briefly mentioned maybe processing loss and change at church with a spiritual director or a spiritual friend. Anything else that seems pertinent?
Well, I mean, anytime we do these, I'm always just really aware of that there are people listening who this may stir up something inside of them, and they're like, oh man, I think there's something there for me. Now what do I do? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just want to point out that there's all sorts of actual resources out there.
That's the good news. You do not have to reinvent the wheel.
No. Like there's spiritual directors. There's wonderful books. Like we're reading one in staff right now with Trish Taylor, Jim Harrington, Robert Creech. It's great.
Yeah.
There's great things like that. Call another pastor.
Yeah.
We have found that to be really helpful.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you might think, oh my gosh, this is happening at my church. It's probably happening everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Any
that's
other
good.
resources you can,
No.
email somebody.
That's correct. Well, here's what we'll do just on this episode. We'll put in the show notes a couple of these books that we've been reading over
Yeah,
the last
because you might
year.
be thinking, okay, yeah, I should definitely get emotionally healthy. All right, how do I get emotionally healthy?
Yeah, we'll put a couple books in that won't be the whole thing, but it'll be a great primer or a great way to kick it off. And
sure.
So those would be good. And I can't recommend having a spiritual friend or a spiritual director for some of this enough.
Yeah, which a spiritual director is almost like just having a really, really good friend
Well,
who
that's what it
listens.
is.
Yeah,
That's what it is. It's
a
spiritual
trained friend.
a trained friend who can listen to the condition of our soul and for where God might be working without being judgmental.
Yeah.
It's really a gift.
Mm-hmm.
So can't say enough about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's what I want to do. Anything else you want to say?
I think I'm good.
I think we're good. All right, here's what I want to do, y'all. We've been talking about things are maybe getting better. I'm feeling encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we've been talking about loss here for the last 10 minutes, I'm feeling very encouraged. I feel like I have new energy with church. I'm very excited. People are getting vaccinated. People are getting vaccinated everywhere in my city. And it's not just people with like pre-existing conditions, but we're
Alaska. Did you see Alaska just opened up 18 and under, right?
Dude, yeah. So it's on.
Yeah.
And our state has done a pretty decent job. Yeah. Shout out Governor Beshear. So I'm feeling encouraged, but I know that the gift of this moment is that we can reimagine.
Yeah.
And if there's things we need to reimagine, man, let's do it right now. This is a gift.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to rebuild teams, and that brings change. And anytime there's change, there's anxiety. And then it's really an invitation for me to be a healthier leader. So I'm just taking that with me. But here's what I was thinking, just as a way to put a bow on this for this particular episode. Here's what I would so love. If you're listening to this episode and you'd like to, when this comes out and you see the social media posts that we always put out for it. So on Instagram, under the Vineyard Worship account, or under the Ferment account, or on Facebook, wherever, I would so love it if in the comment section, you would think about this question and drop us a comment. So here's the question. Number one, what do you want to let go of? Like either personally or at your church. Be specific. What do you want to let go of? And then what do you want to bring in? Like it's a new season, y'all. Here we go. We're on. I'm just excited. So what do you want to bring into the new season? What do you want to let go of? What do you want to bring in? I would so love it if we just kind of had like a little community share here on the socials.
That's my favorite. I often feel like these conversations are just an invitation to like keep talking.
Yeah, that's right. That's really the thing. I noticed a couple weeks ago on the Instagram. Well, it was the episode. It was you and Kate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was on the Ferment Insta. It just blew up. Like people started commenting everywhere. And
it was fun.
It was very sweet. It was very, very sweet because all of a sudden I noticed that in the episode somewhere, Kate had mentioned Cindy Rethmeyer, and then Cindy jumps on and is like, hey.
Well, it was
great.
If you haven't listened to that episode, tables were flipped a little bit. I was hosting it, which was a first. Yeah. So that was a new thing. But it was fun to talk about being a mom and balancing like creative stuff.
Yeah.
It was a fun little conversation. You may want to go check it out.
That's right. But I loved the Instagram chatter that started afterwards. Mm-hmm. It was very kind. It was warm. I'll say that.
Well, Kate's warm.
She is. All right. So here's what we'd love. What do you want to let go of? What do you want to bring in? Mm-hmm. Pop that down in the comments. We would so love to see just where you're at and what's going on. All right, everybody. Peace.
Hey everyone, everyone. Casey Corum here, producer of the podcast. Thanks for listening. As always, if you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. First of all, leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media. Instagram at the Ferment Podcast and Twitter at FermentCast. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Peace.